40 Elephants. The incident that best captures the 40 Elephants menace unfolded on a busy winter afternoon in the 1920s when a group of well-dressed women strode into Selfridges. Onlookers saw nothing unusual: fur coats, hats, handbags. But by the time they left, dozens of luxury items had vanished into custom-sewn dresses lined with hidden compartments. The women didn't linger. They scattered in taxis and motor cars, each carrying enough stolen goods to fund weeks of high living. The 40 Elephants took their name from London's Elephant and Castle district, where poverty and overcrowding in the 1870s created conditions ripe for criminal innovation. With jobs for women limited to domestic service or factory labor, theft became one of the few ways out. Mary Carr, known as the Queen, organized these women into a disciplined collective. She banned snitching, insisted on teamwork, and built a code of loyalty. The gang expanded into dozens of members, moving through the West End in rotating squads so that no shop clerk ever saw the same face twice. The storyline escalated in the 1920s when leadership passed to Alice Diamond Annie Diamond. Diamond Annie brought automobiles into the operation, introduced smash-and-grab raids, and enforced discipline with intimidation. Members perfected the Badger game, luring wealthy men into hotel rooms, then threatening to expose them unless hush money was paid. Sukeban. One defining incident occurred in the mid-1970s when rival girl gangs clashed outside a high school in Osaka. Witnesses described a blur of long skirts and sailor uniforms as dozens of teenage girls armed with razors and chains descended on one another. Teachers who tried to intervene were beaten back. By the end of the melee, several students were hospitalized, and police launched a crackdown that filled juvenile detention centers. This was the world of the Sukeban, literally boss girls, who exploded across Japan in the 1960s and 1970s. Born in working-class neighborhoods during the country's economic boom, they were a reaction against rigid gender expectations. While Japanese society promoted the good schoolgirl ideal, these girls smoked, drank, carried weapons, and openly fought. Their uniforms were deliberately altered: skirts lengthened to trip rivals, sashes used as makeshift whips, jackets customized with gang insignias. The storyline of Sukeban life revolved around strict hierarchies. Charismatic leaders known as Big Sisters commanded loyalty, often through violence. Legends tell of bosses like Junko the Viper, said to dominate Tokyo gangs with both charm and brutality. Initiation rituals included cigarette burns on the arm or surviving a group beating. Gangs such as the Kanto Women or Osaka's Red Roses sometimes had hundreds of members. Their activities spanned from shoplifting and extortion to orchestrated battles with male biker gangs, the Bosozoku. Cripplettes. One chilling incident that defined the Cripplettes came in the late 1980s when a south-central Los Angeles drive-by left 3 rival gang members dead. Witnesses expected to see young men behind the trigger. Instead, the shooters were women, members of the Cripplets, the female arm of the Crips. It sent shockwaves through the city, showing that gang warfare no longer recognized gender boundaries. In the late 1970s, amid the rise of the Crips and the devastation of the crack epidemic, women who were girlfriends, sisters, or cousins of male members often found themselves endangered but powerless. Banding together, they created their own auxiliary. Over time, they carved out a degree of autonomy, running operations that rivaled their male counterparts. Cripplettes trafficked cocaine, transported weapons, and oversaw prostitution rings. Because women were less likely to be stopped by police, they were used as couriers, driving drugs across Los Angeles or even across state lines. Sets like the 26 Cripplettes became notorious, while leaders such as the pseudonymous Yolanda coordinated operations from prison. The gang culture demanded the same initiation rituals as men: beat-ins, criminal tests, sometimes even participation in murders. The outcome has been bloody. By 2025, authorities linked over 100 homicides to female Crip auxiliaries. Federal operations like Project Wildfire have targeted them for trafficking and sex trade crimes. Bloodettes. The Bloodettes announced themselves in the 1970s during a violent standoff in Compton. As Crips attempted to invade a blood-controlled block, it was not only men who fought back. Women armed with pistols returned fire, holding their ground until reinforcements arrived. The shootout marked the beginning of the Bloodettes' reputation as warriors equal to their male counterparts. Their backstory mirrors that of their rivals. The Bloodettes formed as the female counterpart to the Bloods, originally to protect women from being used as pawns. But by the crack era of the 1980s, they had grown into a force of their own. Sets spread through Los Angeles neighborhoods, led by women like AC Lynette Boo Boo, later rumored to inspire cultural references in hip-hop. The storyline of their operations is a familiar list of urban mayhem: drug distribution, arms trafficking, carjackings, and targeted assaults. In 2024 and 2025, social media began to play a role, with younger recruits filming standoffs and broadcasting them online. Police reports documented women orchestrating retaliatory shootings against rivals, even planning hits through encrypted apps. The outcome has been a cycle of violence. The Bloodettes have been implicated in dozens of female-led shootings during the ongoing Crips-Bloods feud. Federal intelligence reports describe them as highly organized and deeply entrenched. Latin Queens. In the 1990s, during a turf war in East Harlem, a group of young women, clad in the gang's colors, cornered a rival and stabbed her repeatedly in broad daylight. The attack wasn't random. It was a message that the Queens were no longer content to play supporting roles. They demanded recognition as enforcers in their own right. The backstory of the Latin Queens stretches back to the 1980s, when waves of Puerto Rican and Dominican immigrants transformed New York City neighborhoods. The Latin Kings had already become one of the most notorious gangs in the city. Women who were often exploited by the men decided to organize themselves into a parallel structure. Under leaders like Nina Lorena, the Latin Queens provided both protection for women and an outlet for ambition. The storyline of their activities revolved around heroin distribution, extortion from bodegas, and fraud schemes. They adopted the Reina system of leadership, where each chapter had its queen. Recruitment often came through family or romantic ties, but initiation required commitment, sometimes enduring violent tests or proving willingness to commit crimes. By the 2000s, their numbers had expanded into the hundreds, with chapters across the country. The outcome has been a mixed legacy of empowerment and devastation. Studies show that nearly 90% of members have been involved in violence, blurring the line between victim and perpetrator. Vice Queens. In the mid-1960s, a corner shop owner on Chicago's South Side reported that a group of young women had demanded protection money. When he refused, his windows were smashed overnight, and he was beaten the following day. It was shocking not only because of the violence, but because the perpetrators were women, members of the Vice Queens, the female auxiliary to the Vice Lords. The backstory of the Vice Queens begins in the early 1960s, when the Great Migration brought waves of African Americans from the South into Chicago's neighborhoods. Poverty, segregation, and failing schools created fertile ground for youth gangs. While men formed groups like the Vice Lords, women carved out space as the Vice Queens, demanding recognition in a male-dominated street culture. Sociological studies from the era describe them as bad girls bargaining with patriarchy, resisting exploitation while still supporting their male counterparts. The storyline of their activities revolved around crime, blended with community life. Women held drugs and weapons to shield male gang members from police searches, shoplifted from department stores like Goldblatt's, and organized prostitution rings under the gang's umbrella. Some women lived double lives, caregivers and mothers by day, extortionists and lookouts by night. Initiation often required surviving beatings or committing petty thefts to prove loyalty. Rivalries with other female sets, like the female Black Pistones, led to violent clashes, stabbings, brawls, and retaliatory assaults. Gaylordettes. A notorious incident in the 1980s put the Gaylordettes in the headlines. A violent bar fight in Humboldt Park spiraled into chaos when a group of young women armed with chains and bottles left several Latin King affiliates hospitalized. The backstory of the Gaylordettes traces to Chicago's North Side in the 1970s, where the almighty Gaylords, one of the city's oldest white gangs, had established dominance. Female relatives and girlfriends wanted their own structure, and in neighborhoods like Wicker Park, they organized semi-autonomous chapters. For white working-class women in a city fractured by race and economic decline, the Gaylordettes became both protection and identity. They ran drugs, particularly heroin and later crack, acted as lookouts during heists, and carried out assaults against rivals. Some even used roller skates to speed through alleys while carrying stolen goods. Tattoos and loyalty oaths marked commitment, while leaders, lady bosses, rotated based on neighborhood influence. Their main conflicts were with Latino gangs like the Latin Kings, and their fights often mirrored the racial tensions of the era. By the 1990s, as the Gaylords themselves were hammered by RICO cases and dwindling membership, the Gaylordettes disappeared from the streets. Police raids dismantled their networks, and the women either aged out, were imprisoned, or blended back into civilian life. Royalettes. In the late 1970s, during a turf conflict with rival gangs, a young woman reportedly drove a car directly into a group of rivals while others opened fire from the windows. Police later identified the attackers as members of the Royalettes, the female wing of the Simon City Royals. The backstory of the Royalettes begins with the Simon City Royals themselves, a white gang born in Chicago's uptown neighborhood during the 1950s. By the 1970s, when the Royals expanded into the People Nation Alliance, their women formed their own group. In neighborhoods like like Logan Square and West Side, young women sought the same respect as the men, and the Royalettes were born. The storyline of their crimes included meth distribution, theft, and direct assaults. Women were used as couriers and stash keepers, but they also participated in drive-by shootings and street fights. Some rose to leadership roles as royal queens, guiding neighborhood sets and organizing prostitution or fraud schemes. The gang maintained its identity with crowns, colors, and the royal lady moniker that set them apart. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Simon City Royals faced intense police crackdowns, and the Royalettes withered in the process. Few female-specific mentions survive in modern reports, though DOJ assessments as late as 2019 noted their historical presence. Cobralettes. One incident in the early 1990s revealed the brutal side of the Cobralettes. A teenage recruit described being forced to endure gang rape as part of her initiation. The attackers weren't strangers. They were members of the Spanish Cobras, the male gang the Cobralettes supported. For these young women, initiation often meant a choice between violence and exploitation. The backstory of the Cobralettes ties directly to the Spanish Cobras, a Puerto Rican gang founded in Chicago in 1958. By the 1970s, women in neighborhoods like Humboldt Park had organized their own branch. Latina teenagers facing poverty, discrimination, and lack of opportunity found belonging in the Cobralettes, even as it exposed them to danger. The storyline of their activities was both supportive and violent. They held drugs and guns for male Cobras, smuggled contraband, and participated in fights with rivals. Some became enforcers, carrying out attacks and intimidation. Their initiation rituals became notorious, sexed in through abuse or jumped in through beatings, both designed to enforce loyalty through trauma. By the 1990s, their involvement in shootings and assaults made them infamous, even in a city accustomed to gang violence. With the Spanish Cobras weakened by federal indictments and neighborhood changes, the Cobralettes also faded. Lady Counts. A dramatic incident in 2025 brought the Lady Counts into focus when police arrested several members in Brooklyn after a series of daylight shootings tied to turf wars. Surveillance footage showed women in hoodies and masks carrying out the attacks. The backstory of the Lady Counts begins in the 1980s in Brooklyn's Caribbean immigrant neighborhoods. As the crack epidemic tore through East New York, women organized to protect themselves and gain independence from male-dominated groups like the Latin Counts and Latin Kings. These countesses rejected being treated as auxiliaries and demanded full control of their own operations. The storyline of their crimes grew increasingly bold. They engaged in fraud schemes, extortion, and shootings. Social media became both recruitment and weapon, with Instagram posts flaunting money and firearms, daring rivals to retaliate. Leadership rotated among women who styled themselves as countesses or queens, asserting authority through violence and reputation. The outcome has been persistence. In 2025, Brooklyn police sweeps indicted over a dozen Lady Counts on charges of murder, racketeering, and fraud. News outlets reported that the women were just as organized and ruthless as male sets. Their notoriety has been boosted by Vice documentaries and local news reports, reminding the public that female gangs are not relics of the past, but an ongoing urban threat. Sisters of the Struggle, SOS. The backstory of SOS is rooted in the rise of the Gangster Disciples. During the 1970s, as Larry Hoover's empire expanded, women, sisters, girlfriends, cousins, formed their own faction. The group took the name Sisters of the Struggle to mirror the GD's growth and development ideology. By the 1980s, they had established themselves as a semi-independent arm of the Folks Nation Alliance. The defining incident came in 1993 during a violent retaliation in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. Drive-by targeting a rival crew left multiple men dead, but police were stunned to discover that the lookout, the driver, and even one of the shooters were women, members of the Sisters of the Struggle. Women managed drug houses, laundered money through salons, and even ran prostitution rings via online ads. They enforced discipline within their ranks through violent violations and recruited new members with initiation beatings or crime tests. Codes and hand signs mimicked the GD's six-point star, embedding them into the broader network. Federal cases later revealed female leaders orchestrating fentanyl distribution in Chicago and Milwaukee, proving their authority was real. The outcome has been grim. SOS members have been tied to dozens of murders, welfare fraud schemes, and narcotics trafficking. Federal indictments in 2024 sentenced several to life terms, and FBI assessments continue to list them as an active female-led threat. Female Black P. Stones. One violent incident in 1969 underscored the menace of the female Black P. Stones. During a turf war with the Vice Queens in Englewood, several women cornered a pregnant rival and beat her nearly to death. Police arrests followed, and the case made headlines for the shocking brutality of female gang violence. The backstory of the female Black P. Stones begins in the 1960s as the Blackstone Rangers, founded by Jeff Fort and Eugene Bull Hairston in Woodlawn, evolved from a youth club into the Black P. Stones Nation. The male Stones gained power by blending activism with organized crime, even securing nearly $1 million in federal anti-poverty grants. Within this structure, women created their own auxiliary, often sisters, girlfriends, or relatives of male members. Membership numbered in the dozens, with ages ranging from 14 to 25. The women held weapons and narcotics to shield male Stones from arrest, extorted businesses, shoplifted, and managed prostitution operations that funneled money back into the gang. While they lacked the headline-grabbing assassinations of their male counterparts, they contributed to Chicago's homicide crisis through stabbings, assaults, and beatings of rivals. When Jeff Fort was convicted in 1987 on RICO and terrorism charges, the organizational backbone collapsed. By the 1990s, the female Black P. Stones had splintered into survival crimes or merged into other female networks. Lady Freaks. An incident in the early 1990s exemplified the brutality of the Lady Freaks. Police raided a West Side apartment and uncovered a human trafficking ring run by women. Several teenagers were being forced into sex work, controlled through violence and intimidation. The leaders of the operation were identified as members of the Lady Freaks. The backstory of the Lady Freaks begins in the 1980s as a female branch of the Freaks. Women from neighborhoods like Austin and Garfield Park, already marginalized by poverty and violence, found identity and protection within the group. Their storyline was dark and often exploitative. They engaged in human trafficking, theft, and brutal beatings of rivals. Initiations involved jump-ins, violent group assaults to test resilience. The name Freaks itself became a badge of defiance, signaling women who would not conform to traditional roles. With the rise of Chicago's drill scene in the 2010, some members even flaunted their affiliations in music videos, merging crime with culture. The outcome has been fragmentation and trauma. The Lady Freaks left a legacy of violence and victimization, with survivors of their recruitment often suffering long-term damage. Studies of female gang trauma frequently cite them as examples of how crime and abuse intersect. They represent one of the darkest corners of female gang culture, where rebellion often blurred into exploitation. Mara Chicas. The defining incident for the Mara Chicas came in El Salvador in 2010, when a young woman nicknamed La Diablita was arrested for orchestrating a machete killing. She was the girlfriend of a gang member and a leader in the female branch of MS-13. The backstory of the Mara Chicas is tied to the rise of MS-13 itself. Born in Los Angeles during the 1980s as Salvadoran refugees fled civil war, Mara Salvatrucha exported its culture back to Central America through mass deportations in the 1990s. Women who initially joined as girlfriends or sisters soon carved out their own identity, becoming couriers, recruiters, and enforcers. Mara Chicas participate in extortion rackets known as La Renta, human trafficking, drug smuggling, and assassinations. Initiation is brutal. Women are often forced to endure sexual violence or 13-second beatings to join. Tattoos of the number 13 or 3 dots mark their commitment. Some rose to leadership roles, managing cells in El Salvador, Honduras, and U.S. immigrant communities. The outcome is ongoing violence. In 2025, federal indictments in the U.S. included Mara Chicas, accused of racketeering and murder. Central American crackdowns under leaders like Nayib Bukele have jailed thousands, yet women remain deeply embedded in operations. 18th Street Ladies. The defining incident occurred in 2006 when LAPD busted a narcotics ring in Westlake and discovered that the entire operation was being managed by women. The suspects were not side players. They were 18th Street Ladies, the female arm of the notorious 18th Street Gang. The backstory of the 18th Street Ladies is inseparable from the 18th Street Gang itself. Founded in the 1960s by Mexican immigrants, excluded from other barrios, 18th Street grew into a transnational powerhouse with as many as 50,000 members. By the 1980s, women had formed their own faction, stepping into leadership roles during the crack boom. Many joined through family connections, sisters, cousins, girlfriends, but quickly established their own identities. Their storyline of activities is global in scale. 18th Street Ladies have participated in heroin and meth trafficking, extortion, and fraud. Because women are less scrutinized, they've often transported drugs across borders, laundered money through businesses, and coordinated prostitution rings. Initiations mirror their male counterparts, beatings, begins, sexual violence or carrying out crimes. Tattoos bearing the number 18 or the Roman numeral 18 mark loyalty. The outcome has been devastating. From Los Angeles to Central America, women affiliated with 18th Street have been arrested in racketeering and homicide cases. Federal indictments in 2022 revealed female leaders overseeing shipments of fentanyl and firearms. Surenas ladies. One violent incident occurred in 2011 in San Diego when two young women armed with pistols ambushed a rival Norteño affiliate, shooting him in broad daylight. Police later confirmed they were part of the Surenas ladies, aligned with the Sur 13 gang network. Their attack was not an anomaly, but part of the ongoing California gang war. The backstory of the Surenas ladies begins with the Sur 13 umbrella, which encompasses countless Latino gangs loyal to the Mexican mafia. By the 1970s and 1980s, women in Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Central Valley had formed their own subsets. Many were drawn in through family ties, but the allure of protection, identity, and economic survival cemented their membership. Their storyline involves every facet of gang life. Surenas ladies run drug houses, collect extortion, payments, and carry out assaults. They often serve as intelligence officers, gathering information about rival sets. Tattoos of Sur or 13 mark allegiance, and blue bandanas are common. Initiations require surviving beatings or committing crimes, sometimes even homicides. Their role is not symbolic. They've been directly involved in shootings and turf wars against Norteños. The outcome has been persistence across decades. Law enforcement operations like Operation Sudden Impact have arrested female Surena leaders for racketeering. In prisons, women continue to organize under the Surena banner, serving as conduits for the Mexican mafia's orders. Norteños. An infamous incident unfolded in 2012 in San Jose when a group of young women launched an armed attack against Surena rivals in a park. Shots were fired, leaving multiple victims wounded. Police reports later confirmed the attackers were Norteñas, female affiliates of the Norteños gang. The backstory of the Norteños mirrors that of their male counterparts. Born from the Mexican mafia Nuestra Familia split in California prisons, Norteños adopted the color red, the number 14, and loyalty to Nuestra Familia. Women in Northern California communities like San Jose, Fresno, and Stockton began organizing their own sets in the 1980s and 1990s. Poverty, immigration struggles, and intergenerational ties drove their recruitment. Their storyline reflects direct involvement in gang wars. Norteños distribute meth and heroin, extort businesses, and retaliate against Surenas. They've been arrested for shootings, robberies, and fraud. Tattoos bearing 44 or N identify them, and their culture emphasizes loyalty and family. Initiations demand either violent tests or sexual exploitation, with younger girls often targeted for recruitment. The outcome is ongoing bloodshed. California authorities attribute dozens of murders to Norteño affiliates, including women. Police crackdowns in 2023-2024 charged dozens with racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. In 2025, the Norteños remain deeply entrenched in the Northern California underworld, rivals locked in an endless cycle of violence with the Surenas. Hoover Gang females. In 2004, a shooting in South Los Angeles revealed the presence of the Hoover Gang females. Two women opened fire on a group of Rollin 60s Crips during a block party. Their actions weren't spontaneous. They were calculated retaliation carried out by the female branch of the Hoovers, one of LA's oldest and most feared gangs. The backstory of the Hoover Gang females dates to the 1970s and 1980s, when the Hoover criminals split from the Crips. Women, often sisters or cousins of male members, formed their own branch, with Amaya Armstead, aka Lady Duck, leading a set of the gang. Hoover Gang females have been documented participating in shootings, robberies, and extortion. They smuggle weapons, manage safe houses, and even enforce discipline on male members. Their initiation often requires committing violent acts. Tattoos bearing Hoover or 52, a reference to their sets, mark loyalty. Law enforcement ties the Hoover Gang females to multiple murders in Los Angeles, and their rivalry with the Rollin 60s continues. Federal task forces have targeted them for drug trafficking and weapons charges, but they endure. In 2025, Hoover affiliates, including women, remain a force in LA, their name synonymous with one of the city's most violent street wars. If you enjoyed this video, click on the ones showing on your screen to enjoy more.